everyone and welcome to my channel. For those new here, my name is Nicki. I'm an author and editor and I post videos here on YouTube about writing, editing, reading and all the other things I love. Today you're joining me for another crash course in the classics when we are going to discuss the Bronte sisters. I will give you a brief overview of their background and then we'll talk a little bit about their works, the themes, where to start reading and some adaptations you may want to check out. So, the Brontes are the daughters of a curate and they are born Charlotte in 1816, Emily in 1818 and Anne in 1820. Their father moves around parishes a lot to begin with, but by 1820 he has established himself as the rector in Haworth in Yorkshire, and that's where essentially they stay for the rest of their lives. Their mother Marie dies in 1821, and that leaves the children pretty much to themselves. They're mostly educated at home, although the girls did go off to school for brief periods at different times, just for a few months here or perhaps a year there. Charlotte becomes a teacher in 1835 at one of the schools she previously attended, and after that she decides to open her own school in Haworth for girls, and she aims to do this with Emily. So she and Emily travel to Brussels, where they are looking to improve their foreign languages and learn about school management. And that happens in 1842 that they go off there. Sadly, things don't really work out. Haworth's not a place that people are anxious to flock to, so they don't really attract many pupils. By 1845, Charlotte has found some of Emily's poems, and the three sisters together decide to publish a collection of poems, some from each of them, under the names Cura Acton and Ellis Bell. Only 2 copies sold. They paid most of the expenses themselves and it didn't really take off for them. However, they had better luck in the following couple of years as they released their first novels. So all the novels initially came out in about 1847 is when they all published their first books. In terms of the rest of their lives, Charlotte received several proposals early on which she refused. In fact, she doesn't get married until her 4th suitor, who is Arthur Bell Nicholls. They marry in 1854 and she falls pregnant shortly afterwards. Unfortunately, she dies and her unborn child with her in 1855. The other sisters are sadly already dead. Emily has succumbed to TB, tuberculosis, in 1848, only a year after she released Wuthering Heights. And Anne unfortunately followed her also from TB in the following year, 1849, and their brother Bramwell had also died in 1848, so it was a very tragic period in those late 1840s for Charlotte and her father, who was still alive. So, in terms of the novels and the works, we'll just have a brief rundown of some of the themes that I've noted down for them here. Charlotte, you would call her works, particularly Jane Eyre, I guess, Bildungsroman, but there's a naturalism to them. Jane Eyre in particular has a mix of this natural realism that was typical of the period, but with this blend of the Gothic in it as well, and a kind of Gothic melodrama in many ways. Her works, Shirley in particular, looks at the role of women in society and social unrest, and then whereas Villette, for example, looks at isolation, and particularly in regards to the social repression of desires, particularly female desires. Meanwhile, Emily, of course, we've only got Wuthering Heights from her, and Wuthering Heights is an amazing book. It's a very innovative book in terms of how it's structured. It has a very strong sexual passion, powerful imagery, a sort of violence to it in many ways. And finally, Anne. Agnes Grey is, again, kind of a Bildungsroman, realism, and a very realistic realism, if we can say that, a real in-depth realism in terms of presenting alcoholism and debauchery that takes place in the Tenant of Wildfell Hall, and the position of women again in society, which was something they all looked at in different ways, the three sisters, through their novels. So we'll have a quick talk about the works and adaptations, and just to make it easier I'm going to do it by sister rather than do all the adaptations together. So we'll start off with Emily, since there's only one book for her, which is of course Wuthering Heights, published in 1847. there have been so many film and TV versions of Wuthering Heights. There's been radio versions, plays, operas, musicals, and to be honest with you, I don't think any of them are brilliant. I think Wuthering Heights is a really difficult book to film and to get right and to do well. Some versions you may want to have a look at. 1939 was the Laurence Olivier film with him as Heathcliff. 1970 Timothy Dalton played the role, and in 1992 Ralph Fiennes gave it a shot. So those are ones you might want to try and have a look at, but to me there is no standout one because I think they all had problems in different ways. I don't think it is. It's one of those I would say that's not filmable, really. No, you can't get it right. Moving on to Anne. So Agnes Grey came out in 1847, followed by The Tenant of Wildfell Hall in 1848. Agnes Grey, I can't think of any versions of Agnes Grey that have been done. If you know any, pop them in the comments because I'd love to check them out, but I can't off the top of my head think of any. Tenant of Wildfell Hall has been filmed a few times. There's an opera of it, it's been on the radio as a play. For TV versions, you probably want to look at the 1968 version or the 1996 version. And again, there's not been huge numbers. She's definitely less filmed than the works of her two sisters. And that brings us on to Charlotte. So we have The Professor in 1857. It's actually the first one she wrote, but it was published posthumously. Jane Eyre 1847, Shirley in 1849, and Villette in 1853. As far as I know, The Professor's had no adaptations. Again, if I'm wrong, if you know of one, do pop it in the comments and tell me. Villette, there was radio versions, but as far as I know there was only one TV version in 1970. And Shirley, again, even less filmed. It's been on radio, but there was a 1922 silent film, I think. And again, I don't know of any other versions, so if you do know, tell me below, please. And that brings us to Jane Eyre, which is obviously the most filmed, I think. Jane Eyre and Wuthering Heights are probably the two most adapted pieces, and I'd say Jane Eyre the most. For films, maybe check out the 1943 Orson Welles, the 1950 Charlton Heston, the 1996 William Hurt, and the 2011 version with Mia Wasikowska and Michael Fassbender. It's my personal favourite because I think Michael Fassbender's awesome in it. There are of course radio, there's ballet, there's operas, there's musicals, there's plays. There are literary sequels, reworkings and retellings. The Wide Sargasso Sea is a retelling of a sort of prequel story from Bertha's point of view, the mad woman in the attic. There have been retellings from Rochester's point of view. There have been weird reworkings such as The Eyre Affair by Jasper Fforde. So many. In many ways you could say Rebecca's probably, by Daphne du Maurier, is probably inspired at least by Jane Eyre. So it really is a work that gets so many adaptations, and there's a lot you can definitely check out from it, but I'd probably start with the film version and the original novel before you branch off into these adaptations. So finally, I'm doing it in a slightly different order than my usual videos because we're covering 3 people at once, but I will end the video just with some of my recommendations. Now, I would suggest just read all of them. I mean, come on, there's 7 books between the 3 sisters, it's not going to take that much work. I would start with Jane Eyre probably, then do Wuthering Heights, then finish off the rest of the Charlotte Brontes, and then the 2 Anne Brontes. Really, there's no books that pose any major difficulty for reading, so there's not one you have to leave till last until you've got to know their style or anything. You could pretty much pick up any of them, but I would probably start with the 2 most famous ones, the Jane Eyre and Wuthering Heights first, and move on from there. One of my personal favourites is actually that I like The Professor, and it gets very little attention, but Charlotte Bronte's The Professor is probably one that I like a great deal, and more, I think it's underrated compared to some of the other books as well. So that was a brief introduction to the 3 Bronte sisters. I hope you found it enjoyable. Do you have a favourite Bronte novel? If so, pop it down below, I'd love to hear your thoughts. If you've got any questions, pop those there too as well, and if I can answer them, I will. I will end there for today, but I look forward to joining you all again very soon with another vlog. Bye for now, everyone.